This week, I guess you could say it's time to add some carnage to this Spider-Man universe. Well, it can't be any worse, right? This is the Superhero Pantheon. Now on this podcast, we will take 3 episodes of the Fox Kids version of Spider-Man that aired in the mid-90s and discuss/review. This is not for Pantheon eligibility, but it is a fun year-long side project at this point. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so by following us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week is, of course, Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, this week we introduced Carnage into this universe, and all I'm going to say is Carnage's introduction here and his subsequent character decisions and even kind of the payoff, the ending, so much better than Venom, the sequel, so much better.
Yeah, and they did it in less time, too, which is a shame because this was a 2-parter that could have easily been a 3 or 4-parter, and these 2 back-to-back episodes really took the season back to a higher level because it was getting at like a mid-level season, not that great. Now these last 5 episodes have come, and now these last 5 episodes actually have like a singular backbone with all these portals that are in every single episode now because of this technology that's been developed by Stark. So I love how these last 5 episodes just got tied together, even though we start with Venom. And I got to admit, man, I was pretty – I was kind of like, Cletus Cassidy. I remember the Woody Harrelson performance. I hadn't seen this in a long time. But somehow this came off better and less cheesy than the Woody Harrelson performance. I don't know how, but maybe it's just the voiceover, the way they animated him. I know there's probably some off social social commentary about like mental health, and they probably didn't approach mental health really the right way when they animated this back in the day. So they didn't really like diagnose Cletus Cassidy or anything like that. He's just pretending to be that stereotypical trope of like what a psycho on TV is. So just to get that out of the way, because nowadays I think we would probably treat this with a more sophisticated approach of mental health than just having this crazy Cletus Cassidy out there who's willing to do anything and do anything crazy. So other than that, I think they did a great job bringing them together. The thing is, they had to rush it though, so I wish we saw the Venom symbiote replicate in space. They mention it off as like this thing that happened off camera, and I wish we saw that because that would have looked really freaking cool. Because then at the beginning it's kind of confusing, like is he going to split off? What's going to happen? Because the way they animate the symbiote this time around for Venom is, I don't know if you noticed, Jerome, but the red and the blue on each side, as opposed to just black and white. Did you notice that?
I did. I think the fundamental issue with the episode that we are going to be discussing first, episode 10, I think it's probably the weakest of the final kind of set of the season. And I think that's kind of where I fall on this, is that there is so much plot going on in episode 10. And this week we're going to discuss episodes 10, 11, and 12. Then next week we will discuss episodes 13 and 14. But I would agree that the final 5 episodes are pretty strong. I think episode 10, where episode 10 kind of falls a little bit short to me, is just with not only are we introduced to Cletus Cassidy as Carnage, but We also have to deal with the fact that Dormammu is here, as Mordo is here. We get Tony Stark's first appearance. We get War Machine. There's just so much going on in this episode, Brian, that there's like no moments to breathe. And it sometimes even feels like Spider-Man is barely in this first episode of the final stretch. And I think that's where I think it struggled. That's where it struggled for me. But that being said, there are a lot of elements that I really liked. Look, Cletus Cassidy is a cartoon character, kind of just as a as an idea, but I think that he works much better here as a cartoon as opposed to whatever Woody Harrelson was doing in Venom 2. So I really liked I liked the beginning of the episode where you kind of have Cassidy being watched and there is an attempted capture by the police. Look, I think there's a lot in common with the performance with Woody Harrelson. I love that we get Terry Lee captured by Cassidy. We get Spider-Man showing off his strength and throwing a steel door, takes a bomb and throws it away from as many people as possible. I did appreciate the fact that Spider-Man does seem to know quite a bit about bombs, Brian.
Yeah, and how to defuse them and how to, figure out how much 200 meters away is from the sky and from side to side. So that was like, oh, I'm going to throw it in the air, and he just throws the bomb in the air. Very, very, smart Spider-Man. But I really like the way that the Dr. Kafka approaches them. And do you want to talk about Kafka? Do they even teach Kafka to kids anymore these days? Because I read Metamorphosis. Because I read Metamorphosis, man, and that was just one of the most depressing things I have ever read, and that's the story of a guy who wakes up and all of a sudden he's a bug creature that his family just rejects, and he just gets depressed and dies. So that's, clearly there's a message there of a metamorphosis within Venom and Cletus Cassidy into Carnage, obviously, but I don't know. This was like 1996. I'm just thinking like, God damn, I was so like, that's such an old book. I don't even know if they teach that anymore.
I mean, it is a short story. I remember reading it in college as an undergrad, so I don't know if the kids are reading it, but it is a very strong piece of literature that everybody should read. It's a really depressing story, but Kafka is a very good writer. Hot take. And I don't think it is a coincidence that the Doctor is named Kafka, as these writers, again, clearly are horror fans and are going for some very deep cuts, the kind of cuts that you would miss as an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, but something that you would notice as an adult. So that is definitely something that I want to talk about now. As Eddie Brock, we get kind of reintroduced to him as there are some flashbacks. Thompson does know who Spider-Man is, but will not say anything. We see him meeting with the therapist. Her name is, of course, Ashley Kafka. The therapist very clearly says that Spider-Man persecuted him. We eventually find out that she is in love with him. Brian, she is a very bad therapist.
Yeah, and I don't know why they did the Harley Quinn thing, but it is what it is, right? They kind of have to steal some things from each other, Marvel and DC, these tropes that they steal from one another. So I get it. And, the whole patient falling in love with the doctor thing. And
I don't even know how established Harley Quinn was at this point. I know the animated series introduced her. So at the time of production on this episode, I don't even know how much. I can't imagine a scenario where Harley Quinn is that influential on it, because I think the only thing that she really was in the animated series.
So was this a trope beforehand? Because I don't remember any sci-fi shows that kind of did this.
I mean, kind of I know it might not be as well worn, but at this point, the therapist in the superhero show that's bad is definitely something that we have seen in a number of TV shows. I mean, my God, MCU has gone to this well twice. They did it in Falcon and the Winter Soldier in some of the worst scenes, and in Moon Knight, where you definitely had Ethan Hawke as a quote-unquote therapist in that show as well. So you've definitely had this trope across many superhero. I mean, think back to Glass as well. Like, that's another example of in that situation, it was more gaslighting. So it may have been a trope in the comic books, but at this point, we have seen it enough in various movies and shows to say that just like them going to farms, bad therapy is a trope in many superhero movies and shows.
Well, when you mentioned and shows, we were talking off air. I was watching Ash vs. Evil Dead recently, season 2. Moon Knight ripped off parts of season 2 where the bad guy becomes a therapist and they try to convince Ash that, oh, it was all your fault and, there was no demons. You just killed those people all on your own because you're crazy. So, yeah, the crazy therapist, or not the crazy therapist, I should say, but the therapist that's trying to gaslight or, make you seem like you're crazy when you're not. Yeah, that's good. But I couldn't believe that, again, this idea that people in power in in New York just really just don't trust Peter Parker, and they're going out of their way to switch the narrative no matter what the situation looks like, even though it's clearly Brock did all these things. It's like, oh no, it's Spider-Man's fault. He made you do those things because you're a criminal and he victimized you. All that bullshit. And I like that little commentary there because it turns out she was just 5 minutes later she was asking for Spider-Man's help. So that was pretty funny.
So we get Dormammu as Dormammu wants to come back. And in order to do so, he needs assistance from Venom in Carnage. And this is where he brings in Cletus Cassidy to be Carnage. And they eventually are able to get Eddie Brock to also return as Venom, as the symbiote is back and wants a measure of revenge on Spider-Man. Dormammu mentions Stark Enterprises. This is our first mention of Stark Enterprises. We get Peter and Deborah talking about interdimensional travel as they are on their way. Dr. Connors is working there. And we also get our introduction to Jim Rhodes as well. Baron Mordo is there in disguise. So again, there's so much coming together. I love when the symbiote takes over Eddie Brock and he says the line, only Venom. And I put in the notes, Brian, only Zool. I don't know if this is a direct callback to that, but it certainly doesn't feel like a coincidence.
Well, with all the deep cuts on this show, I mean, it certainly feels that way. I kind of felt that too, but maybe it's because like the two words going together, only, and then the name. I guess the only time in history that kind of came together was Ghostbusters 2, that those two words coming together. So maybe that's why deep in our subconscious we put that together. But yeah, I want to mention really quick though. We talk about the voice actors on this show, kind of some hidden gems here. Carnage was voiced by Scott Cleverden. He's kind of like not really like a famous person. The standout, although, is the voice of James Rhodes, War Machine. Do you know who was the voice of Shredder in the TV show for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
It was Uncle Phil from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
And here he is as James Rhodes, man.
So there are two connections to Fresh Prince in the show, because last week we talked about Carlton.
Exactly, and this is right when the height of Fresh Prince was at its peak, probably 1996. So yeah, the 90s kind of coming together and kind of giving you this picture of what the 90s was like, especially with Hank Azaria as Eddie Brock, and Hank Azaria is like one of the most important figures in Simpsons history because he's voiced most of the characters. So, and then of course, Ed Asner's on every single episode as well. So this big cast, especially for this episode, really coming together. This is probably one of the more star-studded casts of episodes we've had so far, compared to all the other ones. And let's see, I think that's about it. I think we mentioned Mordo's voice before. That's kind of the only one that's really like the big standout of James Avery. But really cool stuff, man. Because when I was listening to it, I was like, damn, that sounds like Shredder, because they had to put that probably like a metal plate over his voice to kind of modulate the voice to sound like it was coming from behind the mask, and that's exactly what Shredder sounds like. So I was like, oh, what great casting they did.
That is certainly possible, I would say, but I think what I find to be most interesting about this episode is just the idea that Venom is really struggling with what's going on in terms of his personal character and like what he should be doing versus what he shouldn't be doing. And yes, Dormammu gives him an ally now, but Dr. Kafka is basically telling him to not be a bad person. Venom seemingly does not want to hurt her. We get Carnage at the end of the episode living up to his name, and asks if Venom is ready to fight injustice. One of the funnier things there are two funny things that I want to point out about this third act as well. I love that somebody that Deborah asks, where does he always go? Where does he always disappear to? About Peter Parker, and that is a very funny line. It's very meta.
Yeah. And then, of course, I think in one of the upcoming episodes, one of the excuses, well, he's always trying to get the best shots because he's a reporter. So there you go. So that's like the out. Like, he's got to go up the top of the building to get a shot of Spider-Man at the top of the building. It's like the excuse kind of thing. So I thought that's really funny. all the little details behind that line. Good stuff. Good stuff.
I would say so. That is very true. We also get some funny stuff as War Machine is introduced. Carnage calls him a little man of iron, and War Machine's response is Iron Man is the other guy. So I also appreciated that as well. The episode ends with Carnage having Spider-Man in his clutches. A very solid ending to the episode and a good tease for what is to come. But yeah, episode 10 is just a little too busy for me. And I think episode 11 is so much more focused. And because it's more focused, I think it ends up being a much better episode.
Yeah, I wish this was like 3 or 4 parts, because if you stretch that first episode out, it would have felt like a Avengers Civil War, or not Avengers Civil War, Captain America Civil War, because it had that feel to it, with like, oh my God, this guy's here, and somehow it's making sense because it's all related to Tony Stark, and Tony Stark's of course best friends with Rhodey, so Rhodey would be protecting Tony Stark and all these different things, so it all makes sense. It's just it was rushed too much. But once everything kind of settles down, that, like you said, episode 11 really gets that focus, and then. Not only that, I felt like you kind of get more of like Dormammu, you know what I mean? Like a little bit more of what hit behind. Because like once he loses control of Venom, he's like, you know what? I still got Carnage, and he's under my control, so it's cool. So he kind of kept his cool and not like, oh, I have to get Venom and blah blah blah. So I thought that was pretty cool, like the way he kind of kept his head cool and had stick to the plan. I think some villains would kind of like freak out at Venom and try to get like, you can't do that to me or blah blah blah. He kind of let it slide a little bit until the end of the episode, obviously, but. And then, Eddie Brock with that, internal struggle that they tried to do in the movies, but obviously they didn't really, I think it's better in the show here. Well, that's just my opinion, but I think that internal struggle of, trying to be in control of the suit, and he thinks he can be in control of the suit. And even at the end, I think he thinks he has control, but even then, I think he thinks he has control. You know what I mean? The suit's probably got more control over him. He just doesn't realize it. But at the same time, it's that whenever you have that power, they talked about that in the previous episode. Give me the power. I want the power. So once they get the power, it's like it kind of takes over, obviously. So that struggle was really well done. And I thought at the end, especially when we get to it, but I thought the ending was really well done with the portal closing.
Well, I think the fundamental problem with the movie is that Venom needs Spider-Man to play off of, and the Venom movies to this point have not really had that. So it's very difficult to establish a clear idea of how they're doing this. So I think what makes episode 11 work is that you do get this internal struggle with Eddie Brock, and he gets to play off of Spider-Man, and I think that works out tremendously well. The beginning of the episode, Carnage is of course threatening Spider-Man, but Venom says Spider-Man is his to take care of. Dormammu is desperately trying to refocus them. Carnage eventually takes the ray. Ashley yells at them. Jameson comes out of nowhere and tries to unmask Spider-Man, Brian. And War Machine threatens him and says, I don't see no stinking badge, which is very clearly a reference to The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, one of the greatest movies ever made.
I'll watch it eventually, but I think they redid that line in another Sergio Leone movie. I could be so wrong on that, but that feels like that line has been a variation throughout history since The Treasure of Sierra Madre, because I feel like I heard that in one of the Sergio Leone movies, because that just feels like one of those lines. But again, the Mandela effect, who knows? But yeah, that was a good thing. That was fun.
We get Venom and Carnage, so they're still fighting, more refocusing. Carnage tries to steal Spider-Man's life force in order to bring Dormammu back. That's kind of the gimmick, that they have to take life force in order to do that. We get some fun with Aunt Anna. Aunt Anna is not a good person, continues to she's just a Karen, Brian. That's all she is. And we get Jameson yelling at Tony Stark. And all I can say about this is, how did we never get a scene with Robert Downey Jr. and J.K. Simmons arguing as Tony Stark and J.K. Simmons respectively? Come on, man. Come on.
Because they didn't plan it out, and they didn't know it was going to be Jameson and all that bullshit from the 2016 movie. All the potential. I mean, the 2016 movie, Homecoming, still great. But I think knowing now that you could have had Jameson, kind of was like, wow, now we kind of just wasted a movie where we didn't have him. It feels like at this point. And I think that's what you're feeling because that would have been the opportunity, but it would have been like him on, on like the Alex Jones type of show. You know what I mean? It would have been Tony Stark on one of those shows, and then it would have been Jameson. That would have been the heated confrontation, I think. But maybe it's for the best because I think that I don't know a kid audience. I don't know if it can handle that kind of thing nowadays.
I don't necessarily know. I mean, obviously this scene is what it is, and we get our first look at Iron Man. What an incredible team up, Brian. There's a lot of, again, this is a much more focused episode, but the bottom line is that they're trying to steal Life Force so they can bring Dormammu back. And what ends up happening, Brian, is you get a very unique trio. This Brian, this is where we need to bring back King of Trios. Check this out. Spider-Man, Venom, and Iron Man as a trio as they decide that they have to counter what Dormammu, Mordo, and Carnage are doing. So this trio goes off to try and save the day. Brian, do you want to talk about the art of war?
Actually, the quote: "Keep your friends closer and your enemies closer." Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, because Madam Web only speaks in riddles.
Yeah, she never gives a straight answer when we just need a straight answer from her. But that's a whole different issue altogether. But so basically, she gives this advice: keep your friends closer and your enemies closer. Of course, we know that from The Godfather, right? But we were discussing beforehand, like, of course it doesn't, the origin of it's not from The Godfather. So we looked it up, and it was like Sun Tzu, a philosopher, and I guess that's been kind of going on. And I don't know if it was in The Art of War or not, but actually, it does look like it's from The Art of War. So yeah, it's just one of those quotes that have been forever in time. But because I'm such a Godfather mark, and Godfather was such a phenomenal pop culture sensation that everyone associates that quote with The Godfather. But at the same time, coming up in the next episode, there's another Godfather quote. So I'm thinking, like, I think they had this theme of like, since it's the father, maybe they had to tie in they wanted to tie in some Godfather stuff. That's why they kept quoting this line over and over and over. And it becomes this situation where Peter decides, oh my God, I got to team up with Venom to get rid of Carnage, and that's keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So it's like, the lesser of, the enemy or my friend's enemy, or what I mean, that famous quote. I can't even get it out straight now, but my enemy's enemy is my friend, or whatever kind of thing. And yeah, that's kind of what he interprets the quote as. Instead of just, she could have just told him, hey, team up with Venom, that'll save you some time. It took him like 6 hours to figure that out. So I don't know, Madam Web is kind of not very helpful, and she's kind of doing this Jedi mind trick kind of thing that's kind of not working.
And let's remind everyone, the Jedi are bad, and that's kind of what the prequels are all about. How bad the Jedi are. Give straight answers, and maybe the chosen one won't go to the dark side. Just a thought.
Just a thought. Just a thought.
I also like that Madam Web calls Spider-Man the chosen one. And it's basically the same thing. Again, Spider-Man is getting angry because nobody will provide straight answers. He's just trying to follow up. This is the Anakin Skywalker. This is the prequels all over again, Brian. That's what I've realized. This is the prequels all over again.
The prequels of the prequels, because this is 1996, so way before that. But again, it's just those tropes that become kind of the regular thing in superhero movies nowadays, especially with everyone trying to make their elder statesmen sound like the Jedi. Even like, I'm talking to you, Top Gun Maverick. Even though I enjoyed the movie highly, they did, quote a lot of Jedi stuff in there. So I get it. That's why Madam Wen's doing it. But yeah, it was just kind of like that weird team up. But it was kind of cool because, again, I mentioned the Civil War moment where all these weird people coming together and choose different sides, and there you go. So I thought it was a good setup. The only thing I was thinking was like, where the fuck is Doctor Strange?
Yeah, with Dormammu and Mordo being such a factor, it's like, I understand that maybe you don't want to have another character in there, but it's just profoundly strange to me that Doctor Strange is not involved in this situation, especially because it's been established that he's already in New York anyway. So I don't know what's going on here. It's bizarre. So Carnage eventually releases Dormammu. He's out for about 5 minutes. Spider-Man is quickly able to send him back. Life Force returns to everyone. The portal will not close, so they send Carnage through as well. Venom is able to save Ashley, but also goes through the portal. So bottom line is Dormammu is not in the on Earth. Venom and Carnage are also sent away, so they're not dead. So they may still return, but for now they've been taken out of whatever dimension We end the episode, Spider-Man having a meeting with Madam Web, telling Spider-Man to prepare to make a sacrifice, which, Brian, let me tell you, if somebody told me that, I would never talk to that person ever again, because I would be like, well, that's dumb. Just tell me. Like, you clearly know the answer. Just tell me.
I know. It's frustrating, but that's Madam Web, and hopefully the Madam Web movie that is probably going to suck. Doesn't
Oh my
sound
God!
confusing, but
I just
want to put I want to give credit though, because I do love this ending. Like, you know how I love those like amazing to be continued type endings, but I feel like this was what a really good one, because I think if you did this cinematically, it would have came off even better with this whole idea of this portal closing. Because I think what really cemented for me is like Venom has this face turn, and he's reaching out, but he's as Eddie Brock, and he's reaching out to Dr. Kafka, and they fall into love and everything, right? So he's reaching out and he's like, I love you. And then once he realizes he can't get out of the portal, he's like, don't follow me. I love you. Goodbye. And then it just closed. And I was like, oh, what a like 180. What a full arc this Venom character has had, where he redeems himself, gets this love, and then sacrifices himself to save the love of his life kind of thing. And like, I mean, it's very, again, tropey, but god damn it, it was like really out of nowhere and really well executed. But then you realize down the line, it's like, man, there's going to be a darker ending surrounding these portals coming up, because again, the portals are like the backbone of these last episodes. So it's going to get, it's going to get really dark. But this was one of those happier moments that I was like, oh shit, even though like Venom is like you said, he's not dead. He's in that other dimension, but that sacrifice he made really redeemed himself.
So as we transition into talking about episode 12, Brian, a few weeks ago, by the time people listen to this, it was announced that the villain for the upcoming Into the Spider-Verse universe film that's going to be coming out next year. A bit of a shocking announcement, as it was announced Spot, a villain who is a prominent part of the Spider-Man universe, was going to be in that movie as a villain. And what timing, Brian? This episode is about Spot.
Yeah, and anytime you have like what they're doing, multi-dimensional travel, the Spot has to be a part of it, because that's what his powers are. And based on this episode, man, it's like it's perfect for what they're going for in the Into the Spider-Verse sequels. I think it's just perfect. And I think it's perfect to have them in there, because it leads to all these dimensional portal shifts coming up, and that's what that movie's all about. And what I'm hoping for is that they eventually cross into one of these portals and end up in the 1994 animated Spider-Man universe, and that's how you get your cameos and all that shit. And if you want to push it even further, because spoiler alert, Spot ends up in a portal and lost in the portal, and he's stuck in there. But what if he just happens to come out and it's the same Spot that's from the animated universe? That's the bad guy in the new animated movie. I'm just saying.
I don't know that they're going to necessarily make the connection that direct. I'm sure that Lord and Miller and the directors and the writers have their own creative vision. But I will say this episode is both a very, very strong episode of Spider-Man, but also genuinely got me excited for what the possibilities are with Spot. I think you see a little bit of it here. I think you see some of the potential with some of the portal hopping that goes on, and there's even a specific sequence where you see it. And I think for 1996, I think it looks pretty good. But to me, what makes this exciting is the fact that you are going to get different animation styles. There's so much bigger of a budget. To me, it just has so much potential. I am very, very excited to see what they end up doing with Spot. The episode begins with Tony Stark no longer feeling comfortable with interdimensional travel, and tells Dr. Own that he will need to stop his research. Brian, stop me if you've heard this before, but Tony Stark fires somebody, they become a disgruntled employee, and become a villain of Spider-Man. Has that ever happened before?
Oh my God, this has to be the origin of that, right? I mean, they probably did in the comics, but even before this, but this seems to be like the origin of that idea of Tony Stark's the bad guy again because he fired this person. This person became a villain because he got fired by Tony Stark. So I dig it, and I really love that idea, because it really fits, especially what this is going for. Because this idea that Dr. Own, who is the Spot, he was his life's work. And again, that's just like Jake Gyllenhaal in Spider-Man 2. So it's just like, yeah, I get it. Barf technology, they didn't give it a barf name here, but it's this portal technology and guilt and all that stuff, and he's just trying to like cut the ties. And of course, when you do that, obviously you're going to have some disgruntled employees, and this particular scientist was just walking down the street, and all of a sudden, this limo pops up, this window rolls down, and again, you got a Godfather quote, and it's like, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse.
We get introduced to Dr. Sylvia Lopez and Dr. Owen. Immediately purrs on her, Brian. There is so much sexual harassment going on this season.
Yeah. And a little uncomfortable, but they kind of, I don't know, they made it okay by the end, I guess, because they went and spoilers.
Did they though?
I don't know. They were happy together at the end, so it's 96, man. The NWO was running wild at this point.
What does the NWO have to do with this?
I don't know. I looked it up, and this was around November of 96, and I was just kind of tripping out because I was like, God damn, like, that means, like, all that shit had started. And by the time the show had started in 94, like, everything was just so different, even between 94 to 96, because that's where we are now, folks. We're about to jump into 97 really soon, so it's just really crazy.
X-Men 97, funny enough.
Yeah, that's true. All connected.
All right, so we get Dr. Owen's dimensional research going haywire, a tremendous origin story. And again, a tragic backstory, something that we've seen a number of times with so many of the villains. And I think this show is at its best when you have this specific, when you have this going on. To me, that's what makes the show good, is these kinds of villains who are just struggling, who are dealing with their tragic backstories. And that's what makes this such a strong episode. Of course, Kingpin is involved, yelling at Dr. Lopez, reminding her of the bargain that's been made. Because, of course, a bad bargain. Stop making deals with Kingpin, everybody. Mary Jane and Peter Parker on a date at a carnival. Felicia is on a date with Jason. Peter Parker, again, bad boyfriend, leaving Mary Jane and abandoning her. Harry says Peter is a bad friend, which I have to be honest with you, Brian. Harry's clearly not doing well, and he's clearly maybe not of sound mind. But is he wrong?
He's not wrong, because Peter clearly hasn't reached out to him, which is the big thing that I realized in this season, is that he never reached out to him to console him or be like, can we smooth this out? Or be like, I didn't really take your girl, because that's going to be a big thing in the last 2 episodes coming up. But yeah, I mean, it's just building and building and building, and to me, like, it's really building this really big sympathy for Harry, more so than in the movies, because it feels like, I mean, he does get too obsessed with Mary Jane, that's true, but they never have this discussion about how to resolve that or anything. They just kind of like always have this tension, and then you can see this tension here. So, and again, like Spider-Man being the bad boyfriend, but this is where he uses that excuse or Mary Jane's like, I know you're a reporter and you have to do your job, so go report, because this is a major news event that there's a giant portal in the sky of this carnival. So I get it. So that's the excuse, and that's how they kind of get away with that. But really quick, though, I wanted to mention the voice of Spot. You might not have heard of him. He's kind of like a TV actor. His name is Oliver Murrayhead. But if you were a 90s TV watcher like we were, he was the Tombstone pizza guy.
Shouldn't he have played Tombstone then?
That's what I thought too. Man. But again, these weird connections of the 1990s, and I was just tripping out because I do remember that. And I do remember his commercials and eating Tombstone pizza and being significantly disappointed at Tombstone pizza and not wanting to eat that shit again. But those commercials were really funny, and I remember that shit. So it's all connected, folks. It's all connected. But he does a good job here, and I can kind of picture Jason Schwartzman kind of taking over. I don't know if he wants to do a British accent like this guy had, but at the same time, I do feel like Oliver Murrayhead, who did do the voice of Spot, he did a great job, because by the end of it, I was convinced he was not a villain. But that's just my personal take on it, even though he did commit a robbery, but he wasn't. I don't know.
He was just trying to fund his research, and I will say, him messing with Spider-Man is pretty funny, and I think it's one of the few times that the show has used humor to kind of get across a villain-hero relationship. I think so much of it has been laced with horror, so to get something that's a little bit more comedic, I think was a welcome touch.
Yeah, and then they kind of get together as to fight the Kingpin, because it really, the Spot's enemy is still the Kingpin, even though he just wanted his money for this funding. But again, that's just desperation when you're chasing that dream, I guess, so to speak, since this is his life's work. So I get that. So I thought that was really well done, the way they portrayed that, because by the end of his arc, again, it's tragic, very similar to the Eddie Brock thing, but I feel like, he was just kind of acting out of desperation and not really out of like this evil kind of context or tone. So I get why he did what he did, and you're right. Don't make deals with Kingpin, man, because it just bites everyone in the ass. Everybody.
I mean, hypothetically, Brian, I'm not saying this is happening in the real world, but why would you ever make a deal like, okay, so maybe you'll get some money, but why would you ever hypothetically make a deal with like a person or possibly a government that is notorious for, being kind of evil or, being nefarious and, maybe even doing some beheadings, Brian? Again, we're speaking in hypotheticals here, but why would you ever do that?
Money, I guess, because once you sold your soul back in the 80s, it's just pretty much your soul's gone. So, especially when you pay off the cops to cover up the murder of an ex-girlfriend.
I mean, why would you want to owe the Saudi government, Kingpin money? Like, why would you ever want to do that?
Oh boy. 2022, huh? 2022. Nothing's much has changed, apparently.
Nothing much has changed, and multiple sports entities in the world have compromised themselves to the Saudi government. Anyway, we get Lopez telling Kingpin what's going on with Spot. Spot goes after Mr. Fisk. The guards are holding Lopez hostage. Spot goes to capture Spider-Man on Kingpin's orders. I mentioned how I appreciated Spot messing around with Spider-Man previously, but I love that Spider-Man is able to make adjustments and uses a dimensional hole to punch Spot in the face. That was also very good. Spot and Spider-Man decide to team up. Spider-Man uses science once again to help solve a potential problem. I think this is much better than when he used science previously. I really like that. The planet is potentially going to be destroyed, Brian. Kingpin with another great line. There's no profit to be made in the destruction of the planet. I don't know if that's true now in the year of 2022. So maybe Kingpin is to the left of some right-wing oligarchs these days, huh?
Yeah, I couldn't believe that line either, and it was just kind of like unsettling, but just so poignant and just so like unbelievable. That might be one of the best lines the show's ever been written, or from the show that's ever been written. And like, yeah, it's as a kid, right over your head. You know what I mean? As a kid, it's just like, huh, what? He's a bad guy. What does he care? But of course, now with global warming and destruction of natural land and melting icebergs and ice caps and all that shit. But yeah, very, very interesting stuff. And he immediately his mindset changed, and I was like, okay. I kind of get the mindset. Maybe it's not all evil intention. It's just like business first kind of intention, which I guess it could be one and the same sometimes, obviously, or maybe most of it
I
ever.
guess you could say, Brian, it's business, it's not personal.
See, that's what I'm saying, man. They really did the Godfather shit in these 3 episodes so far, and it's true. Like all these quotes they're very applicable to these situations. So it's not like the Godfather was wrong. When they wrote that movie 45 years ago. But it's still such an influential thing because, like, this is like a kid's show with crime, and like they're using all these quotes and stuff. So it is what it is, man. Like, I think that The Godfather has had more of an influence on writing than we think.
So Spot and Sylvia end up also going into a hole. So very similar to the previous episode's ending. I can't say that this is the best thing in the world. It's not a great ending, but I will say that I really did enjoy this episode. And Hobgoblin finding out what's going on with Kingpin and decides that he wants the dimensional technology by himself or for himself. So we were going to get the return of the Hobgoblin in the next episode, which we will discuss next week. But I really enjoyed the episode with Spot. I love what they're doing with Fisk. And yeah, this is definitely a week where it feels like we discussed the weakest episode first, and then things got better in episode 11. And I really, really liked episode 12 a lot.
Especially with all the potential that it's showing us. And I don't think Spot comes back. He may come back. I'm not sure on that because I haven't exactly looked ahead so far, but I don't remember him coming back at all. So that's what got me thinking about that connection. If they really want to go deep cuts and be like something like, yeah, he's the villain from the 94 show that entered this portal, and all of a sudden he got out of this portal and found himself in the Miles Morales into the Spider-Verse universe. So something like that really excites me if they want to go down that road, because we know how creative those minds are with that creative force behind that movie. So we'll see, man, because it's really interesting. And I mean, they had 22 minutes with this concept, and they had so much fun with it. Imagine a whole like movie with this concept. It's gonna be amazing, especially like they were just doing the one dimension. So imagine all the multiple portals and dimensions they can do with the punching and the kicking. It's like a lot of cool stuff can be done.
So next week we will be discussing the payoff to Hobgoblin and the end of the third season going into the fourth. So there is much to look forward to as we are ending things on a bit of a strong note. And we are continuing to examine the Sins of the Father theme does not seem to be as strong this week, perhaps. I guess you did get some of it with Carnage and Venom, with the idea being that Carnage is kind of Venom's son. But thematically, it wasn't as strong. But I feel like the quality of the episode was definitely higher.
For sure. Totally agree with that. And I think they ended it right with the next two episodes. But I just feel like there was some filler in the beginning of this season that they could have cut down, which is why the next season, season 4, they cut it down to, I believe, 11 episodes, which is even less. So there you go.
All right. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week for the season 3 finale.
So does Dormammu, Venom, and Carnage, are they all sleeping with the fishes or what?